Hey guys, Chad Hoover, Kayak Bass Fishing, coming back at you with another interview video from ICAST 2019 with some of the top kayak bass anglers in the country. So this question was one that I didn't know if everybody was going to be willing to share, but we knew we were going to ask this question because if you share your mistakes, you can help others, from making them. So the question that I asked him, what is the biggest fishing mistake you've ever made? Hang out to the end of the video and I'll tell you mine.
It hurts. Can I wipe the tears off? One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in competition is trying to swing a 5-pounder that was that I had hooked with basically a popper. Has small treble hooks. I got in a hurry and I just got excited, got caught up in the moment, and tried to swing that fish into the boat, and it came off right at the boat. And that one fish cost me $10,000 and a spot in a Bassmaster Elite Championship.
Biggest fishing mistake I've ever made. I'm glad you clarified that. I didn't want to start telling you some of the stuff I've actually done.
I would say the biggest mistake is it took me about a year to figure out the best rod to throw a chatterbait on. I lost an enormous amount of fish last year on a chatterbait until I finally went with like a heavy spinnerbait rod. Like I threw a jig rod, I threw a crankbait rod, and finally I ended up going with an APR like heavy spinnerbait rod, and it's short too, it's 6'10". So I would say I messed around with a year throwing a bait not very efficiently and really lost a lot of money on it too.
So one thing that I've made the mistake of in kayak fishing, in tournaments specifically, has been rushing. There's been a lot of times when I have rushed on the water. You start panicking and you think, man, I'm not going to have a limit, and you start moving and moving and moving, and you don't stick with what you've researched, you don't stick with what you've learned about that water in pre-fishing, and you start going off the rails.
Biggest fishing mistake I ever made, being on my kayak, hooked into a double-digit fish. I have no net. Now, some say you don't need one. I'm telling you, if you don't have a net, it's advantage fish. And when you're hooked into a double-digit fish, you don't want to lose it. Take your damn net.
Getting frustrated. Anytime you do that, you've made a mistake. People lose fish for silly reasons. You're in the wrong position, your line breaks. But getting frustrated will ruin your day, and if you can keep from doing that, that is a huge advantage. And every time I do it, I know I've made a mistake, and it takes me a little while to get my composure back.
Biggest fishing mistake I ever made, it's definitely going to have to be involved in a tournament. With kayak bass fishing, everybody knows we do catch, photo, and release. Well, we have identifiers in some tournaments that has to be in the picture with the fish. We were fishing the tournament one time. We actually had an identifier that had to be in the picture, but they also had an armband on us, and my jersey had slid down and covered up that identifier, and they ended up having to take a 23-inch fish away from me. It cost me about $10,000, and that was a hard pill to swallow. It was in a major tournament. So that's my biggest fishing mistake because it cost me the most amount of money.
All right, so the biggest fishing mistake I've ever made is one that I'm really not proud to admit, but I have taken an angler with very limited skills into a situation that required advanced skills, right? It required a set of skills that were much more advanced than I gave myself credit for having, and I knew the other angler didn't have. And so it was reckless on my part. I was a lot younger then. This is not something that I've done recently, and it's not something that I suggest anybody else do, which is part of the reason that I'm weighing in at the end of this video is I took a young, inexperienced, both fishing and kayak fishing angler into an offshore environment in a situation where I felt like my skills and experience would offset the lack of skills and experience from this other angler. And what really ended up happening is the combination of my overconfidence and their inexperience almost got both of us killed. So I don't want to get into the specifics of the situation because it really is irrelevant. What is relevant here is always know your limitations. Always know the limitations of the anglers that you're fishing with or the ones that you're taking out, and be sure that you don't exceed the skill level of both yourself and the other angler, and take into account which person is kind of the weakest link in the chain and scale the trip down to that. Don't scale the trip up to the person with the most experience. Kind of scale your trip to the limitations of the weakest link in the chain. So if there's a group of anglers, always kind of default to, doing something that's comfortable for everybody on the trip. That's the biggest fishing mistake I've ever made. Hopefully none of you guys make that mistake in the future or have made it in the past and been able to learn from it. But yeah, so that's my biggest fishing mistake. Hope this video helped. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Hope you like hearing from some of these guys from the KBF Tournament Series, and we'll see y'all in the next video.